The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds of the Lakehouse, cutting golden strips across the oak table where Caroline and I used to share our coffee. I sat alone now, same chair, same mug, the blue ceramic one with the tiny chip on the handle that she'd refused to throw away. "It gives it character," she'd say, running her thumb over the imperfection the way she did with everything broken that still had use left in it. I wrapped my fingers around the warm porcelain and looked out at Clearview Lake. The water was mirror still, reflecting the October sky like polished steel. Caroline had chosen this place 32 years ago, walking through rooms that smelled of sawdust and possibility. "This is where we'll grow old," she'd announced, as if the decision had been made by something larger than either of us. She'd been right, of course. We had grown old here. I just hadn't expected to finish the job alone. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, each note echoing through rooms that felt too large for one person. I'd built most of the furniture myself back when my hands were steadier and my back didn't remind me of every ladder I'd climbed, every beam I'd lifted. The dining room table where we'd hosted Christmas dinners. The built-in bookshelves where Caroline arranged her mysteries and gardening magazines in perfect rows. The bay window seat where she'd curl up with her knitting, needles clicking in rhythm with the rain. Everything here carried her fingerprints, her choices, her laughter. Even 3 years after the funeral, I sometimes caught myself setting 2 cups on the counter before remembering. The gravel driveway crunched under tires, a sound I'd grown to recognize from any room in the house. But this engine was unfamiliar, newer, with the quiet hum of something expensive. I moved to the window and saw a black SUV pulling up beside my old Ford. The driver's door opened, and out stepped my son. Ethan looked prosperous. That was the word Caroline would have used. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly pressed, the kind that costs more than I used to spend on clothes in a year. His hair was shorter than I remembered, touched with silver at the temples, that made him look distinguished rather than aging. He moved with the confident stride of a man who expected doors to open for him. I hadn't seen him in 8 months, not since that stilted phone call where he'd mentioned needing some space to figure things out with Madison. I'd respected that space, maybe more than I should have. Caroline had always been the bridge between us, translating my practical silences into words Ethan could understand, and his restless ambitions into something I could accept. Without her, we'd defaulted to the awkward politeness of distant relatives. A car door slammed, then another. A woman emerged from the passenger side, Madison, my daughter-in-law, though she'd never seemed comfortable with that title. She wore a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her blonde hair swept back in one of those casual styles that takes an hour to achieve. Behind her, 2 older figures unfolded from the back seat. I recognized them from the wedding photos that still sat on Caroline's dresser. Gerald and Patricia Monroe, Madison's parents. The 4 of them stood in my driveway like a delegation. Gerald adjusted his sport coat and surveyed the property with the calculating gaze of a man appraising real estate. Patricia clutched a leather handbag and whispered something to Madison that made my daughter-in-law nod with satisfaction. I opened the front door before they could knock. Old habits from my construction days. Better to meet trouble on your own terms than wait for it to find you. "Dad?" Ethan's smile was bright and brittle. "You look good." "Ethan." I stepped back to let them pass. "Madison, Mr. and Mrs. Monroe." Gerald's handshake was firm, aggressive. Patricia offered her cheek for an air kiss I didn't give. Madison smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes. The hallway suddenly felt crowded, filled with perfume and aftershave, and the particular tension that comes when people want something they haven't asked for yet. "Coffee?" I offered, because Caroline had trained me to be a host even when I didn't feel like one. "This won't take long," Ethan said, which should have been my first warning. We gathered in the living room, them on the sofa Caroline had reupholstered in soft green fabric, me in my reading chair with its view of the lake. Gerald's eyes roamed the room, taking inventory. He lingered on the stone fireplace I'd built by hand, the custom-built entertainment center, the hardwood floors Caroline and I had refinished together one humid summer. "Beautiful place," Patricia said, but her tone suggested she was already planning changes. "It was Caroline's vision," I said. "She had ideas about everything, down to which trees to plant so they'd frame the view just right." Madison shifted uncomfortably. She'd never known how to respond when I mentioned Caroline. Some people freeze when confronted with grief, as if death might be contagious. "That's actually what we wanted to talk about," Ethan said. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, the posture of a man delivering important news. The future of this place. I waited. In construction, you learn that silence is often more powerful than words. People will fill quiet spaces with more truth than they intended to share. Madison's parents need a place to live, Ethan continued. Their lease is up next month, and with Dad's retirement, he gestured toward Gerald, who nodded gravely, as if confirming a tragedy. We've been looking at senior communities, Gerald said, but the good ones have waiting lists. And the costs. He spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. Their family, Madison added, her voice soft but insistent. And this house has so much space. More than you need, really. The words hung in the air like smoke. I could feel them waiting for my response, watching my face for signs of weakness or compliance. But I'd spent 40 years managing construction crews, negotiating with contractors, staring down building inspectors who thought they could intimidate an old man with a clipboard. My expression didn't change. I see, I said finally. We thought, Ethan said, speaking faster now, maybe it would be good for you, too. All this space, all these memories. It might be time to downsize, move somewhere more manageable. Somewhere more manageable, I repeated. There's a nice senior community in Clearwater, Patricia offered brightly. Garden apartments, meal service, activities. You'd have people your own age to socialize with. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The boy who had learned to fish from this dock, who had helped me build the tire swing that still hung from the old oak tree, who'd brought Caroline wildflowers from the meadow behind the house every Mother's Day until he left for college. That boy was gone, replaced by this stranger in an expensive suit who spoke about my life as if it were a problem to be solved. And if I don't want to move? I asked. The question caught them off guard. Gerald and Patricia exchanged glances. Madison's smile faltered. Ethan's jaw tightened in a way I remembered from his teenage years when he'd been caught in a lie and was calculating his next move. Dad, he said, his voice taking on the patient tone you would use with a child. Be reasonable. You're 73 years old. This house is too big, too isolated. What if you fall? What if something happens? What if it does? We worry about you, Madison said, though she'd never shown any evidence of worry before. Living out here alone, with your heart condition, my heart condition is managed. Still, Ethan said, wouldn't it be nice to have people around, to not have to worry about maintenance, yard work, all the things that get harder as we get older? I stood and walked to the window that faced the lake. The morning mist was burning off, revealing the water in all its October glory. Caroline's garden was still blooming, the late roses she'd babied through 15 summers, the Japanese maples she'd planted to turn brilliant red this time of year, the dock where we'd sat countless evenings, watching the sun set behind the pines. This house isn't just a house, I said without turning around. It's Caroline's legacy. It's where we built our life together. She's gone, Dad. Ethan's voice was gentler now, but the words still cut. She's been gone for 3 years. Holding on to this place isn't going to bring her back. I turned to face them, 4 pairs of eyes watching me, waiting for me to crumble, to accept their logic, to make their lives easier by sacrificing my own. The house stays with me, I said quietly. Gerald leaned forward. Richard, let's be practical about this. The upkeep alone must be... The house stays with me, I repeated. Dad. Ethan stood, running a hand through his silver hair. We're trying to help you. Can't you see that? Help me what? Give up everything I've worked for? Everything Caroline and I built together? Move on, Madison said sharply. That's what normal people do. They move on. The room went silent. Even Patricia looked uncomfortable with the naked honesty of it. But Madison had said what they were all thinking. That my grief was inconvenient, my attachment to this place unreasonable, my refusal to accommodate their plans selfish. I appreciate your concern, I said, though appreciation was the furthest thing from what I felt. But this is my home. It will remain my home until I decide otherwise. Ethan's face flushed. And what about family? What about helping people when they need it? You mean the family that visits twice a year? The family that calls on holidays and birthdays if they remember? That's not fair, isn't it? I looked at each of them in turn. When did you last ask how I was doing? Not what I could do for you, but how I was managing. When did you last visit just to spend time together? No one answered. I thought so, I said. Gerald cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take some time to think about this. Explore other options. There are no other options, Patricia said, her mask of politeness finally slipping. We've looked everywhere. This is the only place that makes sense. For you, I said, not for me. Ethan's shoulders sagged. For a moment, he looked like the boy who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him, who'd cry when he accidentally stepped on a bug, who'd told me I was the strongest man in the world. Dad, he said quietly, please, just think about it. Think about what Mom would have wanted. It was a low blow, and he knew it, using Caroline's memory as a weapon against me. But he'd miscalculated. I knew exactly what Caroline would have wanted. She'd have wanted me to stand my ground, to protect what we'd built together, to not let anyone, even our son, take advantage of my grief. Your mother, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest, would have wanted you to respect your father. She would have wanted you to visit because you missed me, not because you needed something from me. She would have been heartbroken to see what you've become. The words landed like physical blows. Ethan stepped back, his face pale. Madison's mouth fell open. Gerald and Patricia looked toward the door as if calculating their escape route. I think you should leave, I said. Dad, now. They filed out without another word. I watched from the window as they climbed back into the SUV, their body language stiff with indignation and disappointment. The engine started, gravel crunched, and they were gone, leaving only the scent of expensive perfume and the echo of words that couldn't be taken back. I returned to my chair and picked up my coffee mug. The liquid was cold now, but I drank it anyway, staring out at the lake that had witnessed 32 years of my marriage, 3 years of my widowhood, and now this, the final fracture in a relationship I'd once thought unbreakable. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times. The house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called across the water, its voice lonely and wild. I set down the empty mug and allowed myself to feel the weight of what had just happened. My son had looked me in the eye and asked me to give up everything I'd worked for, everything Caroline and I had cherished, so his in-laws could have a place to live. He'd wrapped it in concern for my welfare, but the truth was simpler and uglier. I was an inconvenience, a problem to be solved, an old man whose feelings mattered less than their comfort. But I wasn't broken, I wasn't helpless, and I sure as hell wasn't giving up without a fight. I stood and walked to Caroline's desk, where she'd kept our important papers in neat labeled files. Insurance policies, property deeds, investment statements, all the documentation of a life lived responsibly. I pulled out the deed to the house and spread it on the desk, reading every word as if seeing it for the first time. The house was mine, bought and paid for. No mortgage, no liens, no legal obligation to anyone but myself. Ethan could ask, could plead, could guilt me all he wanted, but he couldn't take what belonged to me, not unless I let him, and I had no intention of letting him. Outside, the October wind stirred the surface of Clearview Lake, sending ripples across water that had been still as glass when the morning began. Change was coming. I could feel it in the air, in the set of my shoulders, in the steel that had entered my spine somewhere between "please think about it" and "goodbye." My son had made his choice. Now I would make mine. The silence after they left felt different from my usual solitude. This wasn't the comfortable quiet of a man who had chosen to be alone with his memories. It was the hollow echo of something breaking. I sat in my chair for a long time after the SUV disappeared, watching the lake change color as clouds drifted across the sun. The water went from mirror bright to pewter gray to deep blue, the way it had every day for 32 years, indifferent to human drama. Finally, I stood and began the ritual of straightening up, though there wasn't much to straighten. 4 coffee cups that had gone unused, cushions that needed refluffing where unwelcome visitors had sat. I carried the cups to the kitchen and washed them by hand, the way Caroline had taught me. The dishwasher's for big messes, she'd say. These little things deserve personal attention. Personal attention. When had I stopped giving Ethan that? The question followed me as I moved through the house, checking windows, adjusting the thermostat, performing the small acts of maintenance that filled my days. In the hallway, I paused before the gallery wall Caroline had created, 3 decades of family photographs arranged with her artist's eye for balance and story. There was Ethan at 2, chocolate cake smeared across his face at his birthday party. At 7, missing his front teeth but grinning as he held up the base he'd caught off our dock. At 16, lanky and serious in his baseball uniform, the one season he had played before deciding sports weren't his thing. At 25, nervous and proud in his wedding tuxedo, Madison radiant beside him in her grandmother's dress. I studied that last photo, looking for clues I'd missed at the time. Had there been warning signs? Had Madison's smile been too practiced, too aware of the camera? Had Ethan's hand on her waist been possessive rather than protective? Or was I reading the present into the past, looking for explanations that weren't there? The truth was simpler and more painful. People changed. The boy who had spent summer afternoons helping me rebuild the dock, who had listened with genuine interest as I explained the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver, who'd asked for bedtime stories about the houses I'd built. That boy had grown into a man I barely recognized. When had it started? I traced the timeline backwards, looking for the moment when concern became condescension, when love became obligation. Maybe it was college, when Ethan discovered there was a world beyond Clearview Lake. One where fathers were measured not by the calluses on their hands, but by the numbers in their bank accounts. Maybe it was his first job in the city, where success meant corner offices and client dinners and a lifestyle that required explanations I couldn't provide. Or maybe it was Caroline's diagnosis. The memory hit me like a physical blow. 4 years ago, autumn like this one, when the doctors had used words like aggressive and metastatic and palliative care with the casual precision of carpenters discussing wood grain. Caroline had taken the news with characteristic grace, already planning how to spend whatever time remained. But Ethan had looked at me as if I'd somehow failed him, as if a better father would have prevented this, would have found a way to keep death from touching our family. I walked to the kitchen window and stared out at Caroline's garden. She'd spent her last good months there, planting bulbs she'd never see bloom, tending roses she'd never smell again. "Promise me you'll keep it going," she'd whispered during one of those endless hospital nights. "Promise me something beautiful will still grow here." I'd promised, and I'd kept that promise, teaching myself the difference between annuals and perennials, learning which plants needed deadheading and which should be left alone. The garden still bloomed every spring, a riot of color and fragrance that Caroline had orchestrated from her hospital bed. But Ethan had never asked about it, had never noticed the way I'd preserved every corner exactly as she'd designed it. After the funeral, something had shifted between us. The shared grief I'd expected never materialized. Instead, Ethan had thrown himself into work, into his marriage, into anything that didn't require him to sit with sadness. And I'd retreated into this house, into routines that kept Caroline's presence alive, into a solitude that felt safer than risking more loss. We'd become strangers who shared a name and a history, but no common language for what came next. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. For a wild moment, I hoped it might be Ethan calling to apologize, to say he'd been wrong, to ask if we could try again. But the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Dalton, this is Patricia Monroe." I should have hung up. Instead, I found myself saying, "Mrs. Monroe." "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." Her voice carried the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to getting her way through persistence rather than charm. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation this morning." "There's nothing to follow up on." "I think there might be. You see, Richard, may I call you Richard? I understand this is difficult. Change always is, especially for people of our generation. Our generation. As if we were peers, as if her 70-odd years somehow gave her the right to speak for mine. But sometimes," she continued, "what feels like loss is actually opportunity, freedom, a chance to discover what comes next." "I've discovered what comes next," I said. "It's staying right here. In this big, empty house." "Richard, be honest with yourself. When was the last time you used the guest bedrooms, the formal dining room, the study? You're rattling around in all that space like a man who's forgotten how to live." The words stung because they carried a grain of truth. I did rattle around sometimes, moving from room to room like a ghost haunting his own life. There were spaces I barely entered anymore. Caroline's sewing room, where her half-finished quilt still waited on the cutting table. The guest bedrooms we'd prepared so hopefully for grandchildren who'd never materialized. The study where I used to pay bills and plan home improvement projects that no longer seemed necessary. But emptiness wasn't the same as purposelessness. This house held 32 years of marriage, 3 years of mourning, and a lifetime of memories that couldn't be measured in square footage. "Mrs. Monroe," I said, "with all due respect, you don't know me well enough to tell me how to live." "No, but I know Ethan, and I know how much he worries about you. We all do." Ethan worried enough to visit twice in the past year. If that's his definition of concern, I'm not impressed. Silence stretched across the line. When Patricia spoke again, her voice had lost its practiced warmth. "You're being selfish, Richard. Family means compromise. It means putting the needs of the group ahead of your own wants. Whose family? Yours or mine? We're all family now. That's what marriage means." "Marriage," I said slowly, "means a lot of things. But it doesn't mean one family gets to absorb another like a hostile takeover." "I don't think you understand the situation. Gerald and I aren't asking for charity. We're willing to pay rent, to contribute to utilities, to help with maintenance. This could be mutually beneficial. You want to be tenants in my house? We want to be family, real family, the kind that supports each other." I walked to the living room window, looking out at the dock where Caroline and I had shared morning coffee for 32 summers, where I still shared it with her memory every day the weather allowed. "The answer is no," I said. "Richard, the answer is no. Don't call here again." I hung up and immediately unplugged the phone from the wall. The sudden silence was profound, almost sacred. Outside, a red-winged blackbird landed on the feeder Caroline had hung from the oak tree. It pecked at the seeds I'd refilled that morning, then flew away, leaving the feeder swaying in the October breeze. The afternoon passed slowly. I tried to read, but the words swam on the page. I tried to watch television, but nothing held my attention. Finally, I went to the garage and pulled out my tools, spreading them on the workbench Caroline had bought me for our 20th anniversary. The familiar weight of the hammer, the precise edges of the chisels, the satisfying click of the tape measure, these things still made sense when nothing else did. I found a piece of oak I'd been saving for the right project and began to plane it smooth, losing myself in the rhythm of the work. Wood didn't lie. It didn't manipulate or cajole or guilt you into doing things you didn't want to do. It simply was what it was, revealing its true nature only under careful, patient attention. As the shavings curled away from the blade, I thought about Ethan's childhood visits to this same garage. How he'd stand on a step stool, tongue poking out in concentration, as he helped me sand a board or hold a piece steady while I measured. How his eyes had lit up when I'd let him use the drill press for the first time, his small hands steady under my guidance. "Why do you build things, Dad?" he'd asked once, maybe 8 years old, covered in sawdust from head to toe. "Because building something that lasts feels good," I'd told him. "Because when you make something with your hands, you put a piece of yourself into it. Long after you're gone, that piece remains." He'd nodded solemnly, as if filing away wisdom for future use. But somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten that lesson. Or maybe he'd learned a different one, that things built by hand could be dismissed, discarded, sold off when they became inconvenient. The light was fading when I finally put away my tools. I'd accomplished nothing productive, had simply moved wood shavings from one place to another, but my hands felt steadier, my breathing calmer. Sometimes the point wasn't accomplishment. Sometimes it was just the reminder that you still had purpose, still had skills that mattered. I made myself a simple dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food that tasted like childhood. Caroline would have added herbs to the soup, maybe a side salad to balance the richness of the cheese. But Caroline wasn't here, and I was learning to be okay with simple things done simply. As darkness settled over the lake, I sat in my chair with a cup of coffee, watching the lights of distant houses flicker on across the water. Other families were settling in for the evening, children doing homework at kitchen tables, couples discussing their days, grandparents reading bedtime stories over video calls with faraway grandchildren. I wondered what Ethan and Madison were doing right now. Were they strategizing their next approach, researching assisted living facilities they could recommend? Or had they simply written me off as a stubborn old man who'd eventually come around when loneliness wore down his resistance? They didn't understand that loneliness wasn't my enemy anymore. I'd made peace with it, had learned to distinguish between being alone and being lonely. Caroline's presence still filled this house in ways that had nothing to do with physical occupation. Her books still lined the shelves, her plants still thrived under my care, her voice still whispered in the settling of timbers she'd helped me choose. This wasn't just a house. It was a marriage made manifest, love translated into lumber and stone and glass. Every room held stories only I remembered now, the way she'd hummed while cooking, the sound of her typewriter when she was working on her newsletter for the garden club, the squeak of the floorboard outside our bedroom that had warned us when teenage Ethan was trying to sneak out after curfew. Ethan wanted me to trade all of that for the sterile comfort of an assisted living facility, where every surface would be sanitized and every memory would belong to someone else. Where I'd be Richard from 304 instead of the man who had built a life with his own hands. I understood his motivations, even sympathized with them to a degree. Watching your parent age was frightening. Imagining them alone, potentially in need of help that might not come, was a burden no child should have to carry. But his solution, removing me from everything familiar, everything meaningful, wasn't protection. It was erasure. The grandfather clock chimed 10 times, its sound echoing through rooms that had heard that chime nearly 12,000 times since Caroline and I had bought it at an estate sale in Millbrook. We'd argued about the price. She thought it was too much. I thought it was too beautiful to pass up. She'd been wrong about the money. I'd been right about the beauty. But we'd both been right about its importance to our home. That clock had measured our marriage in quarter-hour increments, had marked the passage of days both ordinary and extraordinary. It had chimed through birthday parties and Christmas mornings, through quiet Sunday afternoons and sleepless nights when one of us was sick. It had counted down Caroline's final weeks with mechanical precision, indifferent to our prayers for more time. Now it measured my solitude, and I found comfort in its constancy. Some things endured, some things kept faith even when people didn't. I finished my coffee and began the evening routine, checking the locks, turning off lights, setting the automatic timer for the porch light that would come on at dawn. In the bedroom, I paused before Caroline's dresser, where our wedding photo still sat in its silver frame. We looked impossibly young, impossibly hopeful. She wore her grandmother's dress and the pearl necklace I'd given her for our first anniversary. I wore a rented tux and an expression of stunned joy that I'd managed to convince this remarkable woman to spend her life with me. "They want me to leave," I said to her image. "Our son wants me to give up everything we built together." The photograph, of course, didn't answer, but I could imagine what she'd say if she could. Caroline had never been one to back down from a fight, especially when the stakes mattered. She'd fought the insurance company when they'd tried to deny coverage for my heart surgery. She'd fought the county when they'd wanted to rezone our road for commercial development. She'd fought her cancer with grace and determination until the very end. "Fight," I could almost hear her whisper. "Don't let them take what's ours." I turned off the bedside lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressure from Ethan and his in-laws. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by the life Caroline and I had chosen together. They could ask, they could plead, they could guilt and manipulate and threaten, but they couldn't make me leave, not unless I chose to go. And I had no intention of choosing anything that would dishonor the woman who'd made this house a home, or the 32 years of marriage that had been the greatest accomplishment of my life. The fight was just beginning. I woke before dawn, not from any sound or disturbance, but from the strange clarity that sometimes comes after a sleepless night spent thinking. The kind of clarity that cuts through confusion like a blade through soft wood, revealing the grain beneath. I lay in the darkness for a few minutes, listening to the house breathe around me, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: purpose. In construction, you learn that every project begins with a foundation. You survey the land, you test the soil, you calculate load-bearing requirements. Only fools start building without understanding what they're working with. Ethan and his in-laws had made their opening move, but they'd revealed their hand too early, shown me exactly what kind of ground we were standing on. They wanted me gone. Everything else, the concern for my welfare, the talk of family obligation, the carefully constructed arguments about practicality, was window dressing. The truth was simpler. I was an obstacle to their comfort, an inconvenience to be managed. I rose and made coffee in the pre-dawn quiet, my movements automatic but purposeful. Through the kitchen window, the lake was invisible in the darkness, but I could hear the gentle lap of water against the dock, the sound that had been our lullaby for 32 years. By the time the sun crested the pine trees, I was sitting at Caroline's desk with a yellow legal pad, making lists. At the top of the first page I wrote, "What I know. Underneath, I began cataloging facts with the methodical precision I'd once used for project estimates. Ethan's financial situation, ambitious but possibly unstable, given the expensive lifestyle and the need to house his in-laws. Madison's parents, retired, lease ending, looking for a permanent solution they couldn't afford elsewhere. The timing of their visit, coordinated, planned, suggesting they had been discussing this for weeks or months without including me in the conversation. On the second page, what I own, the house free and clear, 43 acres of lakefront property, worth considerably more now than when Caroline and I had bought it. The contents, furniture I'd built, art Caroline had chosen, a lifetime of accumulated possessions that had meaning beyond their monetary value. My construction business, officially retired, but still generating income from commercial properties I'd built and continued to manage. On the third page, what I canned is here, I paused, pen hovering over paper. In my younger days, I might have relied on physical intimidation, the implied threat of a man who had spent decades working with his hands. But I was 73 now, and besides, that wasn't who Caroline had married. She'd fallen in love with a builder, not a destroyer. I could be smarter than they expected. Ethan saw me as a relic, a man clinging to the past because he couldn't adapt to the present. Let him think that. Let them all think that. Underestimation was a gift I could use. At 8 o'clock, I called Marcus Henley. Marcus had been my lawyer for 25 years, handling everything from property acquisitions to contract disputes to Caroline's will. He was my age, maybe a year or two younger, with the kind of sharp mind that had served him well in a career built on paying attention to details others missed. More importantly, he was a friend who'd known Caroline, who understood what this house meant to both of us. "Richard," he said when his secretary put me through, "how are you holding up?" "I need to see you," I said without preamble. "Today, if possible. It's about the house." "What about the house?" "Someone wants to take it from me." There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling. "Can you be here at 10? Marcus's office occupied the top floor of a brick building downtown, the kind of solid, unpretentious space that inspired confidence rather than awe. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with legal texts that looked well-used rather than decorative. His desk was cherrywood, probably built sometime in the 1940s, scarred but dignified. I told him everything. Ethan's visit, the in-laws' demands, Patricia's follow-up call. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on the same yellow legal pads I favored. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "They can't force you to sell," he said. "Not legally. The house is yours, titled in your name alone since Caroline's passing. But that doesn't mean they can't make your life difficult." "How?" "Emotional pressure, financial pressure, if they can find leverage. Adult children have been known to claim their parents are no longer competent to make decisions about their own welfare." The words hit like a physical blow. They'd try to have me declared incompetent? I'm not saying they will. I'm saying it's a tool people sometimes use when other methods fail. It's hard to prove and harder to stick, especially if the alleged incompetent person has good legal representation. He smiled slightly. "Which you do. What do I need to do?" "Document everything. Every conversation, every phone call, every interaction. If they're planning something more aggressive than family guilt, they'll show their hand eventually. We want to be ready." Marcus opened a file drawer and pulled out several forms. "We should also update your documentation, power of attorney, healthcare directives, living will. Make sure everything is current and crystal clear. If someone challenges your competency, we want bulletproof evidence that you've been thinking clearly about your future." I spent the next hour going through paperwork, updating beneficiaries, clarifying my wishes for medical care and end-of-life decisions. It felt morbid, planning for my own decline, but also strangely liberating. These were my choices, my decisions about my own life, no one else's. "One more thing," Marcus said as we finished. "Have you considered making it harder for them to contest your will or challenge your property ownership?" "How?" "A trust. Transfer ownership of the house to a revocable living trust with you as trustee. It accomplishes the same thing as outright ownership. You control everything during your lifetime, but it makes the property much harder to challenge or manipulate after your death. And if I want to sell? As trustee, you can do whatever you want with trust property. The only difference is the legal structure. Think of it as insurance. I signed the preliminary paperwork that afternoon, authorizing Marcus to draw up the trust documents. Outside his office, downtown Millbrook bustled with afternoon activity. Young mothers pushing strollers, retirees window shopping, teenagers who should have been in school loitering near the coffee shop. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by family betrayal and property disputes. On the drive home, I stopped at Henderson's Hardware, the store where I had bought supplies for countless projects over the years. Tom Henderson was behind the counter, as he had been for 40 years, his apron stained with the honest dirt of useful work. "Richard," he said, looking up from an invoice. "Haven't seen you in a while. How are you managing?" "Getting by. Listen, Tom, I need some security equipment, motion sensors, maybe a camera system, nothing too elaborate." Tom's eyebrows rose slightly. "Everything all right out at the lake?" "Probably, but I'd rather be careful than sorry." He nodded and led me to the back corner of the store, where boxes of electronic equipment sat on metal shelving. "Most folks go wireless these days," he said, pulling down a package. "Easy to install, connects to your phone, you can monitor everything remotely." I bought a basic system, 4 cameras, motion detectors, a central hub that would alert me to any unusual activity. Tom offered to install it, but I declined. This was something I needed to do myself, to understand completely. Back at the house, I spent the rest of the afternoon reading instruction manuals and planning camera placement. 1 overlooking the driveway, 1 focused on the front door, 2 covering the sides and back of the house. Nothing paranoid or excessive, just basic precautions any sensible homeowner might take. As I worked, I found myself thinking about the chess games Caroline and I used to play on winter evenings. She'd been the better player, with an intuitive understanding of strategy that often caught me off guard. "You think too much about individual moves," she'd tell me. "Chess isn't about the next move. It's about the move after the next move." I was thinking about that now. Ethan's opening gambit had been direct but clumsy, a frontal assault that had revealed his intentions too clearly. Whatever came next would be more subtle, more carefully planned. I needed to be ready. The camera installation took most of the next morning. I mounted them high enough to avoid casual tampering, but positioned to capture clear images of anyone approaching the house. The motion sensors went near the windows and doors most likely to be used for unauthorized entry. When I finished, I tested the system from inside the house, watching myself on the phone screen as I walked the perimeter. It felt strange, seeing my own property through the lens of suspicion. But Caroline would have understood. She'd always been practical about protecting what mattered. That afternoon, I called my bank and scheduled a meeting with the manager. If Ethan and his family were planning financial pressure, I wanted to understand my own position clearly. 25 years of steady income from my construction business had left me comfortable, if not wealthy. The house was paid off, my medical expenses were manageable, and I lived simply enough that my needs were modest. "You're in good shape, Richard," Janet Morrison told me as we reviewed my accounts. She'd been handling my banking for 15 years, had known Caroline well enough to send flowers to the funeral. "Better than most people your age. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" "I want to make sure no one else can access my accounts. No family members, no emergency contacts, just me." "Of course. Is there a reason you are worried about that?" I considered how much to tell her. Janet was trustworthy, discreet, but she was also part of a small community where gossip traveled fast. "Family complications," I said finally. "Nothing dramatic, but I want to be careful." She nodded and made notes in my file. "We can set up additional security measures. Password requirements, verbal confirmation for any large transactions, whatever makes you feel more secure." Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. Not over other people or their decisions, but over my own circumstances, my own responses. For too long, I'd been reactive, letting grief and loneliness dictate my choices. Now I was being proactive, building defenses, preparing for whatever came next. The late afternoon light was golden on the lake when I pulled into my driveway. A flock of geese passed overhead, their calls echoing across the water as they headed south for the winter. Change was coming. I could feel it in the cooling air, in the way the shadows fell longer each day. But change didn't have to mean surrender. I spent the evening in my workshop, not building anything specific, but simply enjoying the feel of tools in my hands, the satisfaction of precise work. Wood didn't lie or manipulate or guilt you into decisions you didn't want to make. It responded to patient, skillful attention with predictable results. As I worked, I thought about tomorrow's tasks. Marcus would have the trust documents ready for review by the end of the week. The security system would deter casual interference and document anything more serious. My finances were secure, my legal position strong, but, most importantly, I was thinking clearly again. The fog of grief and confusion that had clouded my judgment for months was lifting, replaced by the sharp focus I'd once brought to complex construction projects. I knew my materials, understood my foundation, had calculated the load-bearing requirements. Ethan wanted a fight. He just didn't realize he'd picked one with someone who'd spent a lifetime building things to last. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times as I put away my tools. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts at manipulation or coercion, but tonight, for the first time since Caroline's death, I felt ready for whatever came next. This was my house, my property, my choice, and I was done being pushed around by people who confused love with control, who mistook accommodation for weakness. The real fight hadn't even started yet. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after my meeting with Marcus. I was in the kitchen, scrambling eggs that would taste like cardboard no matter how carefully I cooked them. Grief had a way of leaching flavor from everything, when the security system chimed. My phone lit up with an alert, motion detected at the front entrance. I pulled up the camera feed expecting to see a delivery truck, or maybe old Mrs. Patterson from across the lake, who occasionally stopped by with casseroles she was convinced I couldn't live without. Instead, I saw a man I didn't recognize standing at my front door. Mid-40s, expensive suit, briefcase in hand. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to being taken seriously, the kind of confident posture that came from years of walking into rooms and expecting deference. He knocked, not the casual rap of a neighbor or the apologetic tap of a solicitor, but the firm, measured knock of official business. I muted the television and waited. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I approached the door, but didn't open it. "Can I help you? Mr. Dalton, my name is James Crawford. I'm a real estate assessor with Hartwell and Associates. I understand you might be considering putting your property on the market." The words hit me like cold water. I hadn't contacted any real estate companies, hadn't spoken to anyone about selling, which meant someone else had. "Who told you that?" I asked through the door. "Your son, Ethan Dalton. He hired us to provide a preliminary assessment, standard procedure when families are exploring their options." I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough to see Crawford clearly. He was younger than I'd initially thought, probably early 40s, with the kind of aggressive friendliness that real estate people cultivate like a professional skill. His smile was bright and practiced. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," I said. "I'm not selling my house." Crawford's smile faltered for just a moment before reassembling itself. "Oh, well, perhaps we could discuss—" "There's nothing to discuss. I'm not selling. Mr. Dalton, I understand these decisions can be emotional, but your son seemed quite concerned about your situation here, the isolation, the maintenance requirements for a property this size. Maybe we could just take a quick look around, give you some numbers to consider." "You can give my son a number to consider," I said. "0. That's how much I'm interested in selling." Crawford reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card. "If you change your mind—" I closed the door before he could finish. Through the window, I watched him walk back to his silver BMW, making notes on a clipboard. He sat in the car for several minutes, probably calling Ethan to report his failure. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt something colder and more useful. Clarity. Ethan wasn't just pressuring me to leave. He was actively working to force my hand. The Concerned Son Act was exactly that. An act. Behind the scenes, he was laying groundwork for something more aggressive. My phone rang. Ethan's number. "Dad, I heard from the real estate assessor. I think there might have been some confusion." "No confusion," I said. "You sent him. I sent him away. I was trying to help, to give you some options. Don't you want to know what the property's worth?" "I know what it's worth. It's worth everything to me and nothing to anyone else." "Dad, be reasonable. You can't stay there forever. At some point, I'll be dead. Until then, this is my home." Silence stretched across the line. When Ethan spoke again, his voice had lost its practiced patience. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when you can't manage anymore, when you fall down those stairs or have another hard episode and there's no one around to help. I won't, I said, and hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, processing what had just happened. Ethan had escalated. Whatever his timeline had been, my refusal to cooperate had accelerated it. He was no longer content to wait for me to see reason. He was actively working to create circumstances that would force my hand. I called Marcus immediately. "They're getting assessments," I told him. "Ethan hired a real estate company without my knowledge or consent. He can get all the assessments he wants," Marcus said. "Doesn't give him any legal right to force a sale, but it tells us something about his intentions." "Which are?" "He's building a case, either for incompetency proceedings. Look, the old man doesn't understand the financial realities of his situation, or he's preparing for inheritance planning, wants to know what he'll be getting when you're gone." The callousness of it was breathtaking. Ethan was literally calculating the value of my death. What do I do? Document everything. Keep a record of every contact, every attempt at pressure. And Richard, be very careful about what you sign, who you talk to, what medical information you share. If he's planning a competency challenge, he'll be looking for any evidence that you're not thinking clearly. After we hung up, I walked through the house with new eyes, seeing it not as my home, but as Ethan might see it, a collection of assets to be liquidated, square footage to be monetized. The handcrafted kitchen cabinets I'd spent 3 months perfecting became dated fixtures that would need updating. Caroline's carefully chosen wallpaper became cosmetic issues that would affect resale value. The transformation was nauseating. I spent the afternoon updating my documentation. Every conversation with Ethan, every phone call from Patricia now went into a folder Marcus had given me. Dates, times, exact wording when I could remember it. The real estate assessor's visit got its own entry, complete with photos from the security system. As I worked, I found myself thinking about a construction project from 15 years ago, a shopping center where the original plans had been submitted with all the proper permits and inspections, but the actual construction had deviated significantly from the approved drawings. The building looked fine from the outside, but the foundation was compromised, the load-bearing walls incorrectly placed. By the time the problems became apparent, the damage was structural and irreversible. Ethan was building something too, a case for removing me from my own life. But like that long-ago shopping center, his foundation was flawed. He was assuming I was weak, confused, isolated. He was counting on me to cooperate with my own displacement. He was wrong on all counts. The next morning brought another visitor. This time, my security system showed a woman in her 50s, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of aggressively cheerful expression that usually accompanied bad news. She introduced herself as Linda Chen from Elder Care Solutions. "I understand you might be interested in exploring residential options for active seniors," she said when I opened the door. "You understand wrong." "Oh," she consulted her clipboard, looking genuinely confused. "I have a note here that Ethan Dalton requested an evaluation for his father. Are you Richard Dalton?" "I am, but I didn't request any evaluation." "I see. Well, perhaps there's been a miscommunication. Your son seemed quite concerned about your living situation. He mentioned that you're here alone, that there have been some health concerns." "What health concerns?" She flipped through her papers. "He mentioned a heart condition, some mobility issues, concerns about isolation and depression following your wife's passing." Each word was a small betrayal. Ethan was sharing my private medical information with strangers, painting me as a man too diminished to make his own decisions. The heart condition was real, but well managed. The mobility issues were non-existent. I was in better shape than most men my age. The depression was something I'd worked through with Caroline's doctor after her death, a normal response to loss that had improved significantly over time. But in Ethan's version, I was a failing old man whose family was desperately concerned for his welfare. "Ms. Chen," I said, "I appreciate your concern, but your services aren't needed. My son has made some incorrect assumptions about my situation." "Of course, but since I'm here, perhaps I could just take a quick look around. Sometimes family members see problems that we ourselves don't recognize." "No." Her professionally cheerful expression flickered. "Mr. Dalton, I understand that admitting we need help can be difficult. Pride is natural at your age." "At my age," I interrupted, Pride is about the only thing left that can't be taken away by doctors or social workers or well-meaning children. I suggest you respect it. She left with the same apologetic efficiency she'd arrived with, but not before making more notes on her clipboard. I watched her car disappear down the driveway and wondered what report she'd file, what boxes she'd check on whatever form Ethan had authorized. The pattern was becoming clear. Ethan wasn't just pressuring me to leave. He was building a paper trail that would support a narrative of decline and incompetence. Real estate assessors to show I was financially naive. Elder care evaluators to document my supposed inability to live independently. How long before he sent medical professionals to question my mental capacity? That afternoon, I drove to town for groceries and found myself studying every face, wondering who might be watching, who might be reporting back to my son. The paranoia was uncomfortable, but not irrational. Ethan had shown that he was willing to involve strangers in our family business, to share private information if it served his purposes. At the grocery store, I ran into Tom Henderson from the hardware store. We made small talk in the cereal aisle until he lowered his voice and glanced around. "Richard, I probably shouldn't say anything, but someone was asking about you yesterday. Young fellow, well-dressed, wanted to know about your shopping habits, whether you seemed confused or forgetful." "What did you tell him?" "Told him you were sharp as ever, paid your bills on time, never seemed anything but competent to me, but it struck me as odd. Thought you should know." I thanked Tom and finished my shopping with a growing sense of being under siege. How many people had Ethan contacted? How many local businesses were now watching me for signs of decline, cataloging my behavior for some future report? Back home, I called Marcus again. "They're interviewing people about my mental state," I told him. "Local business owners, probably neighbors too." "Aggressive," Marcus said, "and probably premature. If they're building a competency case, they are moving too fast, being too obvious about it. That works in our favor." "How?" "Because it shows premeditation. A loving son concerned about his father's welfare doesn't hire investigators and assessors before trying to have an honest conversation. It shows this is about money and control, not genuine concern." "What's my next move?" "Keep living your life normally. Don't give them anything to use against you. And Richard, consider having a full physical and mental health evaluation done by doctors of your choosing. If this goes to court, we want current medical documentation showing you're perfectly competent." That evening, I sat on the dock with a cup of coffee, watching the sun set over Clearview Lake. The water was dark glass, reflecting the last light of day. A loon called from somewhere across the lake, its voice wild and lonely. Caroline had loved that sound, had said it reminded her that some things remained unchanged even as the world grew stranger around them. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 3 years mourning the loss of my wife, only to discover I was about to lose my son as well. Not to death, which would have been clean and comprehensible, but to greed and manipulation and the kind of calculated betrayal that left no room for reconciliation. But I wasn't the same broken man who'd stumbled through Caroline's funeral, who'd spent months afterward moving through routines without purpose or direction. That man might have surrendered, might have signed whatever papers were put in front of him and shuffled off to whatever facility Ethan had chosen. This man, the one who had built a successful business from nothing, who'd constructed this house with his own hands, who'd fought insurance companies and zoning boards and bank loan officers, this man was ready for war. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times as I came back inside. I locked the door and set the security system, then sat down at Caroline's desk to update my documentation. Today's entries: real estate assessor, elder care evaluator, reports of surveillance from local businesses. The paper trail was growing on both sides. Ethan was documenting my supposed incompetence. I was documenting his campaign of harassment and manipulation. Only one of us would prevail. And I had no intention of being the one who lost. The call came at 7:30 on a Thursday morning, early enough to suggest urgency, but late enough to catch me after I'd had my coffee and cleared my head. I didn't recognize the number, but the voice was familiar. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who'd been Caroline's primary physician and had treated my heart condition for the past 5 years. "Richard, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to speak with you about something unusual." I muted the morning news and gave her my full attention. "What's that, Sarah?" "I received a call yesterday from someone claiming to be your son. He was asking for your medical records, said he was concerned about your cognitive function, and wanted to understand your current mental health status. The coffee in my mouth turned bitter. What did you tell him? Nothing, of course. HIPAA laws prevent me from sharing any information without your written consent. But Richard, he was very persistent. He mentioned specific details about your living situation, your wife's passing, even your heart medication. Someone's given him quite a bit of personal information. I set down my mug and walked to the window overlooking the lake. The morning mist was just beginning to lift, revealing water that looked like hammered pewter in the early light. Did he say why he needed the records? He claimed you'd been showing signs of confusion, memory problems, difficulty managing your affairs. He said the family was considering intervention options and needed medical documentation to proceed. Intervention options? His words, not mine. Richard, I want you to know that in my professional opinion, you're as sharp as ever. Your physical health is excellent for a man your age, and I've seen no signs of cognitive decline. If there are family concerns, they're not based on any medical reality I'm aware of. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, processing what Ethan's medical inquiry meant. He wasn't just building a case for incompetency. He was actively seeking evidence from my own doctors, trying to find medical justification for removing my autonomy. The violation felt profound, like someone had been rifling through my most private possessions. But Dr. Mitchell's call had also given me something valuable, confirmation that Ethan's campaign was leaving tracks. Every phone call, every inquiry, every attempt to gather information about me was creating a record. His desperation was making him sloppy. I spent the morning thinking about chess again, about Caroline's advice to look several moves ahead. Ethan was playing a reactive game, responding to my resistance with increasing pressure. But pressure could be redirected, used against the person applying it. At 10 o'clock, I called an old friend. Mike Sullivan and I had served together in the National Guard 40 years ago, weekend warriors who'd become genuine friends over shared frustrations with military bureaucracy and badly organized training exercises. After discharge, Mike had gone into private investigation, building a small but successful practice that specialized in background checks and corporate security. We'd stayed in touch over the years, the kind of friendship that could survive long silences and pick up exactly where it left off. Richard, Mike's voice carried the same gravel it had acquired from too many years of smoking, though he had quit a decade ago. Been thinking about you since I heard about Caroline. How are you holding up? Could be better. Mike, I need a favor. Professional, not personal. What kind of professional? I told him about Ethan's campaign, the assessors and evaluators, the medical inquiries. Mike listened without interruption, occasionally making sounds that suggested he had heard similar stories before. Family disputes are ugly, he said when I finished, especially when money's involved. What do you need from me? Background information, financial records, business dealings, anything that might explain why Ethan needs me out of this house so urgently. You think there's more to this than just wanting to help his in-laws? I know there is. The question is what? Mike was quiet for a moment. Richard, you understand that anything I find stays between us unless you specifically authorize me to share it? I understand. And you're prepared for the possibility that what I find might be worse than what you're imagining? The question hung in the air like smoke. Was I prepared? Did it matter? Ethan had already shown me who he'd become. The only question now was understanding why. Find what you can find, I said. While Mike worked his end, I decided to do some investigation of my own. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse and spent several hours in the public records office, looking up property transfers, business filings, and court documents. The clerk, a woman named Janet who had worked there for 20 years, helped me navigate the filing system. Research project? She asked, as I pulled another box of files. Something like that. Family genealogy. She nodded and left me to work. For the next 3 hours, I traced Ethan's financial footprints through the public record. His home purchased 2 years ago, a mortgage significantly larger than I'd expected, requiring both his and Madison's income to qualify. A business loan for his consulting practice, secured against their house. 2 credit card judgments that had been satisfied, but suggested a pattern of overspending. Most interesting was a court filing from 6 months ago, a civil suit brought by former business partners, alleging breach of contract and demanding repayment of a $50,000 investment. The case had been settled out of court, but the initial filing painted a picture of someone whose financial obligations had outgrown his ability to meet them. I made copies of everything and drove home as the afternoon light slanted low through the pine trees. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern. Ethan wasn't just looking for a convenient solution to his in-laws' housing problem. He was looking for a way out of his own financial troubles. That evening, I called Marcus and shared what I'd found. "Interesting," he said, "but not necessarily actionable. Lots of people have financial pressures. It doesn't give us legal grounds to prevent him from pursuing guardianship proceedings, but it gives us motive." "It does. And if he does file for guardianship, evidence of financial motivation would be very useful. Keep documenting, Richard. Every contact, every pressure tactic. We're building a counter-narrative." The next morning brought another security alert. This time, it was a woman in her 30s, professionally dressed, carrying a briefcase. She knocked with the same authoritative rhythm I'd learned to associate with unwelcome visits. "Mr. Dalton, my name is Amanda Price from Adult Protective Services. I'd like to speak with you about some concerns that have been raised regarding your welfare." Adult Protective Services. Ethan had escalated again. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "What concerns?" "We've received reports that you may be living in unsafe conditions, that you're isolated and possibly neglecting your health and nutrition. I'm here to conduct a wellness check." "Who made these reports?" She consulted her tablet. "I'm afraid I can't share specific details about the reporting party, but I can tell you that the concerns seem genuine. May I come in and take a look around?" Every instinct told me to refuse, to send her away the same way I'd dismissed the others. But I realized this might be an opportunity rather than a threat. Let her see the house in perfect condition. Let her observe that I was healthy and competent. Let her document that the concerns were unfounded. "Of course," I said, stepping back. Amanda Price spent 45 minutes walking through my house, making notes on her tablet, asking questions about my daily routine, my medical care, my support network. I showed her the refrigerator full of fresh food, the medicine cabinet with properly organized prescriptions, the clean, well-maintained rooms that showed no signs of neglect or hoarding. "Mr. Dalton," she said as we finished in the living room, "I have to say, everything here looks perfectly normal. Your house is clean and well-maintained, you appear to be in good health, and you're clearly capable of caring for yourself. Then we're done here. I'll file a report stating that I found no evidence of self-neglect or unsafe living conditions. Whoever made the initial report, well, their concerns appear to be unfounded." After she left, I called Marcus immediately. "APS found no problems," I told him. "Complete exoneration." "Excellent, and stupid of them to involve APS this early. It shows they're desperate, and it gives us official documentation that you're perfectly capable of independent living." What's next? We wait for their next move. But Richard, I think it's time to consider some preemptive action of our own. Such as? Making sure that house is absolutely, unquestionably yours in ways that can't be challenged or manipulated. The trust documents are ready. Once you sign them, your property goes into a legal structure that makes it much harder for anyone to contest your ownership or force a sale. I drove to Marcus's office that afternoon and signed the trust documents. It was a strange feeling, transferring ownership of my house to myself as trustee of my own trust. Legally, nothing had changed. I still controlled everything. But structurally, the property was now protected in ways that made Ethan's schemes much more difficult. "One more thing," Marcus said as we finished. "I think we should be proactive about medical documentation. If they're questioning your competency, let's get current evaluations that prove beyond doubt that you're mentally sharp." He referred me to Dr. Patricia Kovac, a neuropsychologist who specialized in cognitive assessments for elderly patients. The testing took most of a morning: memory exercises, problem-solving tasks, spatial reasoning puzzles. When we finished, Dr. Kovac smiled. "Mr. Dalton, your cognitive function is excellent, better than many people 20 years younger. If someone is suggesting you're not capable of making your own decisions, they're either misinformed or deliberately misleading." I requested copies of all the test results and medical evaluations. If Ethan wanted to play the competency game, I'd be ready with documentation that would make him look foolish. That evening, Mike called with his preliminary findings. "Your son's in deeper trouble than you thought," he said without preamble. "The business loan you found is just the tip of the iceberg. He owes money to 3 different creditors, including a private lender who specializes in high-risk loans. How much? Total, probably close to 200,000. And Richard, some of these people don't take late payments lightly. The number hit me like a physical blow. Ethan wasn't just financially overextended, he was drowning. No wonder he needed me out of the house. He was probably planning to force a sale, use his inheritance to pay off debts that could destroy him. There's more, Mike continued. His consulting business lost its 3 biggest clients in the past 6 months. Something about missed deadlines and inadequate work product. He's basically operating on fumes now. I sat in the gathering darkness of my living room, processing what Mike had told me. My son wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. Desperate people made poor decisions, took risks they wouldn't normally consider, which made him dangerous. Mike, I said, I want you to keep digging. Every debt, every creditor, every business deal that went wrong. I need to understand exactly how bad this is. You got it, but, Richard, be careful. If he's as desperate as this looks, there's no telling what he might do when he realizes you're not going to cooperate. After we hung up, I walked through the house, seeing it with new understanding. This wasn't just my home anymore, it was Ethan's salvation. In his mind, forcing me out wasn't cruelty, it was survival. He probably told himself he was doing what was necessary, that I'd be better off in assisted living anyway, that everyone would benefit from his pragmatic solution. The rationalization would make him even more dangerous. I checked the security system, made sure all the cameras were functioning, confirmed that the motion sensors were armed. Then I sat down at Caroline's desk and updated my documentation. Financial pressure, private lenders, business failures. The picture was becoming clearer with each revelation. Ethan had painted himself into a corner, and he saw my house as the only way out. But corners could be traps as well as refuges. If he was desperate enough to involve adult protective services, desperate enough to lie to my doctor, desperate enough to hire strangers to investigate my mental state, then he was desperate enough to make mistakes, and I intended to be ready when he did. The grandfather clock chimed 10 times, marking another day in what had become a war I hadn't chosen but fully intended to win. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new schemes, new attempts to separate me from everything Caroline and I had built together. But tonight, I was no longer playing defense. Tonight, I was planning my next move. The meeting request came on a Friday afternoon, delivered not by Ethan himself, but through Madison. Her voice on my answering machine was artificially sweet, the kind of tone people use when they're reading from a script they've rehearsed. Richard, hi, it's Madison. Ethan and I would like to sit down with you tomorrow to discuss some family matters. We were thinking maybe lunch at the Millbrook Inn, around 1 o'clock. We really think it would be beneficial for everyone if we could have an honest conversation about the future. An honest conversation. After weeks of surveillance, medical inquiries, and adult protective services visits, they wanted honesty. I didn't call back immediately. Instead, I spent the evening reviewing everything Mike had discovered, organizing the financial documents I'd copied from the courthouse, making sure I understood every detail of Ethan's situation. If they wanted a conversation, I'd give them one they'd never forget. Saturday morning dawned, gray and cold, with the kind of biting wind that cut through jacket fabric and found every gap in your defenses. I dressed carefully, not the work clothes I usually wore around the house, but the good slacks and sport coat I'd bought for Caroline's funeral. If this was going to be a formal confrontation, I'd dress the part. The Millbrook Inn sat on the town square, a restored 19th century building that had been converted into a restaurant 20 years ago. Caroline and I had eaten there on our anniversary for the past decade, always requesting the corner table by the window that looked out on the courthouse where we'd been married 47 years ago. Today, walking into that familiar space felt like a betrayal of her memory. Ethan and Madison were already seated, not at our usual table, but at one in the center of the dining room, where other patrons would overhear any raised voices. A calculated choice. They were counting on my reluctance to make a scene in public to keep me compliant. They'd underestimated me again. Dad, Ethan stood as I approached, offering his hand. I ignored it and took my seat. Ethan, Madison. Madison's smile was brilliant and empty. Thank you for coming, Richard. We know this is difficult, but we really think it's important that we clear the air. The waitress appeared with menus and coffee. I ordered black coffee and nothing else. Food would be a distraction, and I wanted my full attention focused on what was about to unfold. "So," Ethan said, stirring sugar into his coffee with careful precision, "we've been doing some thinking since our last conversation. About your situation, about what's best for everyone. My situation seems fine to me. Does it?" Madison leaned forward, her expression practiced concern. "Because we've heard some troubling things, Richard. Reports that you are struggling more than you're willing to admit." "Reports from whom?" Ethan and Madison exchanged glances. She nodded slightly, giving him permission to proceed. "The adult protective services worker you spoke with mentioned some concerns," Ethan said. "About isolation, about your ability to maintain that big house safely." It was a lie, and they all knew it. Amanda Price had found no problems, had filed a report stating exactly that. But they were counting on me not knowing the contents of her official report, assuming I'd accept their version of events. "Actually," I said, pulling a folder from my jacket pocket, "I have a copy of her report right here." I set the document on the table between us. Ethan's face went pale as he read the summary. No evidence of self-neglect or unsafe living conditions. Subject appears healthy, competent, and capable of independent living. "There must be some mistake," Madison began. "No mistake," I said. "She found exactly what anyone would find. A healthy, 73-year-old man living independently in a well-maintained home." Ethan recovered first, his practiced smile sliding back into place. "Well, that's good news. But Dad, even if you're managing now, we have to think about the future. What happens when you can't manage, when you need help and there's no one around to provide it? I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But wouldn't it be better to plan ahead, to make the transition while you're still healthy enough to make good decisions?" I looked at my son, really looked at him. The expensive suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. He was playing a role, but the script was failing him. "Ethan," I said quietly, "why don't you tell me about the private lender?" The question hit him like a physical blow. His coffee cup clattered against the saucer, and Madison's practiced smile faltered. "I don't know what you mean." "Apex Financial Solutions. High-risk loans for business professionals. Current balance approximately $67,000, with interest accruing at 22% annually." The color drained from Ethan's face. Madison looked between us, clearly not understanding what was happening, but recognizing that the conversation had taken a dangerous turn. "How did you—" Ethan started, then stopped himself. "How did I find out about your debts? About the business clients you lost? About the civil suit from your former partners?" I pulled out more documents, spreading them across the table like cards in a poker game. "It's all public record, son. Anyone who knows where to look can find it." Madison grabbed Ethan's arm. "What is he talking about? What debts?" But Ethan was staring at me with something approaching fear. "Dad, you don't understand the situation." "I understand it perfectly. You owe nearly $200,000 to various creditors. Your business is failing. Your mortgage payment is 3 months behind. And you see my house as the solution to all your problems." "It's not like that, isn't it?" I leaned forward, my voice still quiet but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You hire real estate assessors without my knowledge. You call my doctor asking for confidential medical records. You send adult protective services to my home based on fabricated concerns. You investigate my mental health through local business owners. Also, you can build a case that I'm incompetent to manage my own affairs." Each accusation hit its mark. Ethan's shoulders sagged with each revelation, and Madison's expression shifted from confusion to horror as she began to understand what her husband had been doing. "The plan was simple," I continued. "Get me declared incompetent, assume guardianship, force the sale of my property, use the proceeds to pay off your debts. Your in-laws needing a place to live was just convenient cover for what was really a financial rescue operation. Dad, please, but here's what you didn't count on." I pulled out the final document, the trust paperwork Marcus had prepared. "This house is no longer mine to lose. It belongs to the Richard Dalton Family Trust, of which I am the sole trustee. Even if you somehow managed to have me declared incompetent, you couldn't force a sale without going through a probate court, which would require proof of financial necessity and oversight of any proceeds." Ethan stared at the trust documents as if they were written in a foreign language. "You can't do this." "I already have. That money, it's my inheritance. It's supposed to be mine someday. Someday, maybe. If you're very lucky and I decide to forgive what you've done to me. But right now, today, it's mine. And it will remain mine for as long as I choose to keep it that way. Madison found her voice finally. Ethan, tell me you didn't really do all those things. Tell me you didn't lie to government agencies about your own father. But Ethan wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. Naked desperation mixed with something that might have been hatred. You don't know what it's like, he said, his voice rising enough that other diners began to notice. You don't know the pressure I'm under. These people I owe money to, they're not patient. They don't care about family circumstances or sob stories. They want their money, and if they don't get it, what? They break your legs? Burn down your house? This isn't a movie, Ethan. These are legitimate business loans with legitimate consequences for default. You could help me. You could choose to help your own son instead of hoarding money you'll never spend. Help you what? Bail you out so you can make the same mistakes again? Enable the kind of financial irresponsibility that got you into this mess in the first place? I'm your son, he said. And for a moment he sounded like the boy who used to cry when thunderstorms scared him. Doesn't that mean anything to you? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with 37 years of shared history. I thought about the man who'd taught him to fish, who'd driven him to Little League practice, who'd walked him down the aisle at his wedding. I thought about the boy who'd brought Caroline wildflowers, who'd helped me build the tire swing, who'd told me I was the strongest man in the world. It used to, I said quietly, but you stopped being my son the moment you decided I was an obstacle to be removed rather than a father to be respected. Ethan's face crumpled. Madison reached for his hand, but he pulled away from her touch. What am I supposed to do? He whispered. How am I supposed to fix this? The same way I fixed everything when I was your age, I said, standing to leave. By working, by making sacrifices, by taking responsibility for the choices you've made instead of trying to make other people pay for them. I left money on the table for my coffee and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Madison's voice, urgent and confused, asking questions Ethan couldn't answer. Other diners had stopped pretending not to watch, their faces reflecting the fascination people always showed for other families' destruction. Outside, the wind had picked up, sending dead leaves skittering across the courthouse square. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline and the aftershock of 40 years of parental love finally reaching its limit. Through the restaurant window, I could see Ethan slumped in his chair while Madison gestured angrily, her professional composure finally cracking. Whatever conversation they were having, it wouldn't end well for either of them. I started the engine and drove home slowly, taking the long way around the lake. The water was choppy today, whitecaps rolling across the surface like small explosions of fury. By the time I reached my driveway, the first drops of rain were hitting the windshield. Inside the house, I poured myself a glass of water and sat in Caroline's chair, looking out at the lake that had been our constant companion for 32 years. The confrontation was over, but I felt no sense of victory. If anything, I felt hollow, as if something essential had been carved out of me and could never be replaced. The phone rang, Ethan's number. I let it go to the machine. Dad, please, we need to talk. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry about all of it, but I need your help. Please call me back. I erased the message without saving it. The grandfather clock chimed 3 times. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called, its voice wild and mournful. Rain began to fall in earnest, drumming against the windows with increasing intensity. I had won this battle. Ethan's schemes were exposed, his leverage eliminated, his desperation laid bare for everyone to see. The house would remain mine, the trust would protect it from future manipulation, and the documentation I'd gathered would prevent any successful competency challenge. But victory felt suspiciously like loss. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd loved unconditionally for 37 years, was gone. In his place was a stranger who saw me not as a father, but as an asset to be liquidated when convenient. I sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the rain and the clock, and the profound silence of a house that had once been filled with love, but now held only the echo of it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Ethan would likely make more desperate attempts to salvage his situation. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by the life Caroline and I had built together. It would have to be enough, because it was all I had left. The aftermath came in waves, like ripples spreading across still water after a stone has been thrown. In the days following our confrontation at the Millbrook Inn, Ethan tried calling 6 more times. I let each call go to the machine, listening to his voice grow progressively more desperate, more fragmented. "Dad, please pick up. We can work this out. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your son. The people I owe money to, they're getting impatient. I need help." "Why won't you answer? Just talk to me." Each message was harder to ignore than the last, not because they moved me toward forgiveness, but because they reminded me of the boy he'd once been. The child who had run to me when he was hurt, who'd trusted me to fix whatever was broken in his small world. But that boy was gone, had been gone for years. I'd just been too blind with grief and loneliness to see it clearly. On the 4th day, Madison called. "Richard, this is Madison. I need you to know that I had no idea what Ethan was doing. The assessors, the medical inquiries, I thought he was genuinely concerned about your welfare." I picked up the phone for this one. "Madison, I'm leaving him," she said without preamble. "I can't be married to someone who would treat his own father this way. My parents are horrified. They had no idea their housing situation was being used as cover for whatever this was. I'm sorry." "Are you? Really?" I considered the question seriously. Was I sorry that Ethan's marriage was ending? That his financial desperation had cost him not just his father's respect, but his wife's as well? "I'm sorry for all of it," I said finally. "For the choices that led us here, for the man your husband became, for the pain this is causing you. But you're not sorry for protecting yourself." "No, I'm not sorry for that." She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't blame you," she said finally. "If someone tried to do to me what he tried to do to you, I'd fight back too." After she hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen and tried to process what I felt. Relief, certainly. Sadness for the collateral damage. Madison hadn't deserved to be caught in the crossfire of her husband's desperation. But underneath it all was something I hadn't expected. Peace. For 3 months, I'd been under siege, my autonomy and dignity under constant attack. The stress had been constant, a low-grade fever of anxiety that colored every decision, every interaction. Now, suddenly, it was over. The phone calls would stop eventually. The schemes and manipulations would cease. Ethan would have to find another solution to his problems, or face the consequences of his choices. Either way, it was no longer my responsibility. Mike called that evening with a final report. "Your son filed for bankruptcy this morning," he said. "Chapter 7. Looks like he's liquidating everything. The house, the business assets, probably his wife's jewelry and car, starting over from scratch. Will it be enough? To cover his debts? Probably most of them. But the private lender, Apex Financial, they're listed as secured debt. He might still owe them money after the bankruptcy. And if he can't pay, then he learns what happens when you borrow money from people who don't accept excuses." I thanked Mike for his work and hung up. Through the kitchen window, I could see the lights of other houses across the lake, families settling in for the evening, normal lives proceeding normally, unburdened by the kind of drama that had consumed my fall. The following week brought an unexpected visitor. Tom Henderson from the hardware store knocked on my door around noon, carrying a covered casserole dish. "From my wife," he said, handing it over. "She heard about your family troubles and thought you might not be cooking much for yourself." "That's very kind of her." Tom shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to say more, but not sure how to begin. "Richard, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you doing all right? I mean, with everything that's happened?" It was a simple question, but it caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had asked how I was doing without wanting something from me in return? "I'm managing," I said, "some days better than others. If you need anything, groceries picked up, repairs around the house, just someone to talk to, Helen and I are right here. We've been neighbors for 15 years. That means something." After he left, I opened the casserole dish and found beef stew, still warm, with a note from Helen Henderson. "Thinking of you during this difficult time. Call if you need anything at all." The kindness of it, the simple human decency, nearly undid me. I'd spent so much time focused on Ethan's betrayal that I'd forgotten there were still people who cared about me, not for what I could provide, but simply because I was their neighbor, their friend, a member of their community. That evening, I called Dr. Mitchell and scheduled a full physical. Not because anyone was questioning my competence, but because it had been too long since I'd taken proper care of myself. While I was at it, I made a dentist appointment and scheduled the annual maintenance on my heating system. Small acts of self-care that Caroline would have insisted on, had she been here to insist. November brought the first snow, a light dusting that turned the lake into a Christmas card. I stood at the kitchen window with my morning coffee, watching the flakes fall silently onto water that had begun to show ice at the edges. Winter was coming, but for the first time in months, the prospect didn't fill me with dread. I had enough firewood stacked and covered. The generator was serviced and ready if the power went out. The pantry was stocked with canned goods and non-perishables. I was prepared for whatever the season might bring, the way Caroline had taught me to be prepared for everything. The phone rang less frequently now, a few hang-ups that might have been Ethan, lacking the courage to speak. One call from a debt collector looking for him at my address. Apparently he'd listed the Lakehouse as a previous residence. I told them I had no forwarding information and wasn't interested in serving as an intermediary. "He's your son," the caller said, as if that explained everything. "Yes," I replied. "And this is my house. The two facts are unrelated." In early December, I found a lawyer's letter in my mailbox. Ethan's bankruptcy had been finalized. All his debts except the private loan had been discharged. He was, legally speaking, starting over with a clean slate. I felt nothing when I read it. No satisfaction at his downfall, no sympathy for his circumstances. He'd made his choices and faced their consequences. The natural order of cause and effect had been restored. A week before Christmas, I drove to the cemetery where Caroline was buried. I brought fresh flowers, white roses, her favorites, and cleared away the leaves that had gathered around her headstone. The granite was cold under my fingers as I traced the inscription we'd chosen together during her final days. "Beloved wife and partner in all things." "He's gone," I told her quietly. "Our son is gone, and I don't think he's coming back." The wind stirred the pine boughs overhead, sending snow cascading down like nature's benediction. I sat on the small bench I'd installed beside her grave and let myself feel the full weight of what I'd lost. Not just Caroline, though her absence remained a constant ache, but the future I'd imagined for our family, the legacy I'd hoped to pass down, the relationship with Ethan that I'd never really had, but had always believed was possible. "I protected what we built," I continued. "The house is safe. No one can take it away or force me to leave. But I don't know if that was worth losing him forever." The only answer was the wind and the settling of snow and the distant sound of traffic from the highway. Caroline couldn't tell me if I'd made the right choice, couldn't reassure me that protecting our life's work was worth the price I'd paid. But as I sat there in the gathering dusk, I realized I didn't need her permission or approval. I'd done what felt right, what felt necessary. I'd refused to be manipulated or controlled, even by someone I loved. I'd chosen dignity over family peace, self-respect over enabling. Whether those were the right choices would be for others to judge. I could live with them. Christmas morning came cold and bright, with the kind of crystalline light that made every surface sparkle like cut glass. I made pancakes, Caroline's recipe, from the index card box she'd kept beside the stove, and ate them while watching the lake slowly give way to the sun's warmth. The phone rang around noon. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was different, smaller somehow, stripped of the confident manipulator's tone I'd grown to hate. "Ethan. I wanted to call, to say Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas." A long pause. "Dad, I know I can't fix what I did. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I understand now why you fought back. I understand that what I tried to do was wrong." I didn't respond immediately. Trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with words alone. "I'm getting help," he continued. "Financial counseling, therapy. I'm trying to figure out how I became someone who could treat his own father that way." "And have you figured it out?" "Some of it. Fear, mostly, and this idea that I was entitled to things I hadn't earned. That because I was your son, your success should somehow be mine too." He sounded sincere, but then again, he'd always been good with words. The question was whether the sincerity went deeper than the surface. "I'm glad you're getting help," I said carefully. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry for all of it." The line went quiet except for the sound of his breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I miss you, Dad. I miss the relationship we used to have, before I screwed everything up." "The relationship we used to have was built on things I didn't know about you," I said. "Your capacity for deception, your willingness to hurt people who loved you. Maybe missing it isn't the point. Maybe the point is building something honest, if that's even possible anymore." "Is it? Possible, I mean?" I looked out at the lake where ice was forming in delicate patterns along the shoreline. Spring would come eventually, melting the ice and revealing the water beneath. But the lake would remember winter, would carry traces of the cold in its depths long after the surface had warmed. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know it's not something that can be rushed or forced. It would have to be earned." "I understand." "Do you? Because earning means time, years maybe. It means proving through actions, not words, that you've changed. It means accepting that I may never trust you the way I once did." "I understand," he repeated, and this time I almost believed him. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and tried to process what I felt. Not forgiveness, that was still too far away, might always be too far away, but perhaps the beginning of something. Not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. Not trust, but the possibility that trust might someday be rebuilt. It wasn't closure, exactly. It was more like the recognition that some stories don't end cleanly, that some wounds heal slowly and imperfectly, leaving scars that serve as reminders rather than sources of pain. That evening, I built a fire in the fireplace and sat in Caroline's chair with a book I'd been meaning to read. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the lake and the surrounding woods in pristine white. The grandfather clock chimed the hours with its steady, reliable voice, marking time in a house that was finally, completely mine. I thought about the confrontation at the restaurant, about the weeks of siege that had preceded it, about the choice I'd made to fight back rather than surrender. It had cost me a relationship with my son, possibly permanently, but it had preserved something else. My autonomy, my dignity, my right to make decisions about my own life. The fire crackled and settled, sending sparks up the chimney Caroline and I had designed together. Everything around me spoke of the life we'd built, the choices we'd made, the love that had sustained us through 47 years of marriage. That legacy was worth protecting, even at the cost of family harmony. As the evening deepened, I found myself thinking less about what I'd lost and more about what remained. The house that sheltered me, the lake that soothed me, the community that supported me. The memories of Caroline that filled every room, every corner, every quiet moment. The knowledge that I'd stood my ground when it mattered most. It wasn't the future I'd imagined when Caroline was alive, when Ethan was the boy who brought her wildflowers and helped me build the tire swing. But it was my future, chosen rather than imposed, earned rather than inherited. The grandfather clock chimed 11 times. I banked the fire, turned off the lights, and began the evening ritual that had become as natural as breathing. Check the locks, set the timer for the porch light, pause at Caroline's photograph to whisper good night. In the bedroom, I lay in the darkness and listened to the house settle around me. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and possibilities. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by the life I'd chosen to protect, carrying the scars of recent battles, but also the quiet satisfaction of having prevailed. It was enough. It had to be enough. And perhaps, in the end, enough was more than most people ever managed to achieve. The snow continued to fall, silent and soft, covering the world in the promise of new seasons to come.